1847. A woman kneeling in the dirt somewhere west of Fort Kearney, Nebraska. Cast iron Dutch oven buried in glowing coals. Bread rising under the lid. She has been walking 15 miles today. These are 12 recipes cooked in a single cast iron pot across 2,000 miles of open prairie. Everyone still works. Most cost less than $1. And everyone vanished from American kitchens within a single generation. Now, before we dive in, tap that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what is coming next. Number 12. Son of a gun stew. When a calf was slaughtered on the trail, the cook used every organ in a single Dutch oven stew. Heart, liver, tongue, sweetbreads, kidneys, and something called the marrow gut. The marrow gut was a tube between two of the calf's stomachs, filled with a substance resembling bone marrow. Edible only while the calf was young and still nursing. The brains were added at the end as a thickener, salt and pepper only. Old Chuck Wagon cook said anything else was sissy. The whole mess went into a cast iron pot and was buried in coals, 2 to 3 hours. In polite company, they called it son of a gun stew. The real name was something the cowboys never cleaned up. A 1942 piece in Gourmet magazine noted the gentler title was used only when ladies were present. Nothing was wasted, not a single ounce. That was not poverty. That was respect for the animal that kept you alive. That stew used everything in the animal. But the next recipe used something even more unlikely. A bottle of vinegar baked into a pie 100 miles from the nearest orchard. Number 11. Vinegar pie. When fresh fruit ran out hundreds of miles from any tree, women made pie with apple cider, vinegar, sugar, flour, and water. The vinegar mimicked the tartness of apples. Joel Palmer's Trail Guide recommended a small keg of vinegar for each adult. Vinegar cost 25 cents a gallon. They used brown sugar, flour, butter, and cinnamon, whisked until smooth. The crust was rolled out on a flour sack draped over the wagon tailgate. They poured the filling in and baked the pie in a Dutch oven over coals for 30 to 40 minutes, the edges turning golden brown, the smell of cinnamon and warm vinegar rising on the evening air. She baked a pie in the middle of nowhere, with no fruit, no oven, and no kitchen. Nobody called it clever. They called it supper. A pie needs a crust, and a crust needs flour. Flour was the single most critical item in the wagon. What they did with it when the supply was nearly gone was something else entirely. Number 10. Hardtack pudding. Hardtack was one of the least liked foods on the trail. Flour and water cut into biscuit form and baked until it would last for years. Stiff as a brick and nearly flavorless. You had to crack it with a rifle butt or soak it overnight in coffee. Dunking it softened the texture just enough to chew, but crumbled and mixed with molasses and bacon drippings, pressed into the Dutch oven and baked until the top cracked brown, it transformed. The hard flour dissolved into a dense, sweet mass, enough to stick to the ribs and quiet a hungry child. They took the worst thing in the wagon and made it into dessert. That was not desperation. That was the intelligence of a woman with nothing left and children who needed something sweet. Hardtack was trail food for emergencies, but cornmeal was the everyday grain. It traveled in every wagon and crossed the continent in 100 forms. Number 9. Johnny cakes. Cornmeal mixed with water and salt, shaped into small patties, cooked in the Dutch oven or directly in the ashes of the fire. Flour at 2 cents a pound. Cornmeal right alongside it. 20 pounds recommended per adult. Mixed with salt and water until the dough held its shape. Pressed into small rounds and placed in the hot ashes of the campfire. Or pressed into a greased Dutch oven slicked with bacon fat. 5 minutes each side. Outside crisped. Inside warm and dense. the smell of toasted corn on wood smoke, small enough for a child's hand. Pioneers called them corn dodgers. Easy to carry. You could keep them in your pocket and eat while you walked. A recipe older than the nation. Borrowed from the people who already lived on this land, the pioneers learned it from Native Americans and carried it 2,000 miles west. It fed them both. When the cornmeal ran out, they still had dried meat in the wagon. But dried meat on the Oregon Trail was not what you pull from a gas station rack today. Number 8. Jerky gravy over Dutch oven biscuits. Dried jerked beef crisped in bacon fat in the Dutch oven. Removed. The drippings thickened with flour and water into a rich gravy. Poured over biscuits baked in the same pot. Beef cut thin, salt cured, dried in the sun until dark as leather. Fried crisp until it crackled. A handful of flour stirred into the hot drippings. Creek water added slowly. Stirred until it coated the back of a wooden spoon. Ladled over biscuits torn in half. When meat was running short, the gravy stretched what remained. Poured over soda biscuits, potatoes, or cornbread, it turned scraps into a full meal. Today, you would find this on a restaurant menu under a different name at $16 a plate. They called it supper and moved on. Number 7. Spotted pup. Rice simmered in the Dutch oven with milk, a beaten egg, raisins, sugar, and whatever spice was left. Nutmeg or cinnamon. Lid sealed. Cooked until set. Rice at 5 cents a pound. Dried fruit at 5 cents. An egg from a hen caged under the wagon if one survived the jolting of the road. Cooked rice placed in the Dutch oven. Enough milk to cover the grains. A beaten egg cracked in. Seasoned with vanilla, nutmeg, salt, and sugar. Topped with raisins. The raisins swelling in the warm milk. The sweetness that filled the pot when the lid came off. Children sitting on the wagon tongue, watching and waiting. They called it spotted pup because of the raisins dotting the white rice. It was dessert and comfort. A mother telling her children that even 200 miles from the last town, something could still be sweet. Every one of these recipes was made by a woman who had walked 15 miles that day. No temperature control beyond moving the pot closer to the fire or further from it. No counter, no running water, no thermometer. Once the Great Plains were reached, trees were few. Women collected dried buffalo dung for cooking fuel. She did not complain about that in her diary. She complained about the dust, the food she simply made, twice a day, for 5 months. Martha Morrison Minto remembered it plainly. The mothers on the road had to undergo more trial and suffering than anybody else. The meals were the trial she chose not to mention, because the meals were the one thing she could still get right. Number 6. Dried apple pie. Dried apple slices were reconstituted in water and stewed with sugar. Then they were baked into a pie in the Dutch oven. Dried fruits were a staple among the pioneers and practically everyone in 19th century America. They were sliced thin, strung on thread, and dried through the winter before departure. Then they were reconstituted over the fire until soft. Pies ranked second only to bread in importance on the trail. Apple pie headed the list. Pies were so central to American life that women were expected to bake them for most meals, even on the open road. A Dutch oven made an excellent pie pan. Cecilia Adams and Parthenia Blank, twin sisters headed for Oregon in 1852, baked pumpkin pies one. Sunday, the day they were supposed to rest. The pie was not a luxury, it was morale. A woman baking pie on the Oregon Trail was holding her family together. She did it with flour, fat, and dried fruit. She did it on Sunday when she was supposed to rest. The pies and puddings were the bright spots, but the meal the family ate every single night was simpler and heavier. It depended on a pot that never stopped simmering. Number 5. Cornmeal mush with bacon and molasses. cornmeal stirred slowly into boiling salted water, cooked to a thick porridge, served with fried bacon and a spoonful of molasses. Eaten every morning for 5 straight months, the molasses added a dark, slightly bitter sweetness. The bacon fried alongside was genuinely good. Crispy, smoky, the rendered fat turning slightly amber. Around 4 in the morning, the wagon leader sounded a trumpet or fired a rifle. By 5, breakfast was ready. By 6, the men hitched the wagons while everyone ate. At 7, the bugle sounded and they moved out. Pioneers walking 15 miles a day burned somewhere around 4,000 calories. The daily ration provided maybe 2,600 on a good day. Nobody loved it. Everybody ate it. It was the meal that got you standing in the dark. That is all it needed to be. Mush got them through the morning. But once a month, if the wagon train stopped long enough, something extraordinary happened. A recipe that required the whole company. Number 4. Molasses stack cake. A celebration cake baked for trail weddings and special occasions. Each guest baked one thin layer in a Dutch oven. The layers stacked with dried apple butter between them. The more guests, the taller the cake. Molasses, buttermilk, a beaten egg, flour. Each layer baked thin until firm and brown. Apple butter spread between. The cake sat overnight. Moisture softened the layers into something that pulled apart like bread. A wedding cake built by a community because no one family could afford to bake one alone. Every layer was a guest. Every guest was a promise. That cake was as tall as the community that built it. Nobody has improved on that idea since. Number 3. Bacon and beans with molasses. The most important meal on the Oregon Trail. Pinto beans simmered all day in the Dutch oven with salt pork, finished with molasses. Bacon at 5 cents a pound. Beans at 6. They started soaking the night before. Set on the coals at dawn. Simmered all day while the wagon rolled. Bacon was on the menu at least twice a day. The sweetness of the molasses against the smokiness of the fat, against the earthiness of the beans. It works on every level. Served with biscuits baked in the same Dutch oven just before supper. As one pioneer put it plainly, the only change we have from bread and bacon is bacon and bread. The woman who made those beans made them right. And the family that sat down to that Dutch oven every night for 5 months kept going in the morning. That pot was not a meal. It was the reason they did not turn around. The Dutch oven was the only kitchen these women had. Few overlanders traveled without one and a good iron skillet. 10 inches of cast iron with a flanged lid. Coals underneath. Coals on top. No temperature dial. No timer. She learned heat by holding a hand over the lid and counting seconds. That knowledge was never printed in a book. It passed hand to hand, woman to woman, from Missouri to Oregon City. It lived in the wrist. Number 2. Dutch oven biscuits with saleratus. Flour, water, lard, salt, and saleratus. Baking soda. Baked in the Dutch oven every single day of the trail. The daily bread of westward expansion. Joel Palmer's guide recommended 200 pounds of flour per adult. 2 pounds of saleratus. 12 cents a pound. Folded into the dough, it released carbon dioxide and caused the bread to rise. Emigrants actually gathered natural saleratus from the white-crusted shores of Saleratus Lake in Wyoming, a name that place still carries today. Esther Bell Hannah wrote in 1852 that she made up the dough, kneaded it in a cloth, and baked it. It looks good, she said, for all it had nothing but water, salt, and saleratus. The sound of the crust cracking when you lifted the lid. Hot biscuits torn by hand, eaten with bacon fat or molasses. She baked bread every morning before dawn with flour she could not afford to waste. It was the one act that made 2,000 miles of open prairie feel like a kitchen. The biscuits kept them alive day by day. But one recipe kept something else alive, something that was not food and not quite human. But it had to be fed every single night, or it would die. And it is still alive today. Number 1. Sourdough starter bread. A living culture of wild yeast carried in a crock from Missouri to Oregon, fed flour and water every night without fail, used to leaven bread baked in the Dutch oven every morning. The starter was alive. It had to be tended like a child. Carl Griffith's great-grandmother created the family sourdough culture. She carried it west from Missouri along the Oregon Trail in 1847. She was a cook in Dr. John Savage's wagon train. They settled near Salem, Oregon. The culture rode in a wagon with limited provisions. It required daily feedings to stay alive, despite the dust, the heat, the scarcity of everything. Carl Griffith received that starter as a boy of 10, around 1930, in a Basque American sheep camp in the Steens Mountains of Oregon. He baked bread in a Dutch oven in a campfire pit. He carried that starter on cattle drives across southeastern Oregon, baking in chuck wagons the same way his great-grandmother had done 80 years before, the smell of sourdough rising in a cast-iron pot over coals. The sharp tang of a dynamic culture of wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria that had traveled 2,000 miles across the continent. Griffith died in early 2000 at the age of 80. Nobody in his family wished to continue growing the sourdough. That should have been the end. But a group of strangers on the internet formed the 1847 Oregon Trail Sourdough Starter Preservation Society. They call themselves Carl's Friends. They have given away more than 54,000 samples of that starter, free, to anyone who asks. When the pandemic shut the country down in 2020, Americans started baking sourdough by the millions. Flour vanished from grocery store shelves. The practice they were returning to had been traveling this continent since 1847. It is still alive, nearly 180 years old. It crossed the Oregon Trail in a covered wagon. It was baked in a Dutch oven over an open fire. And it is making bread this morning in kitchens it has never seen. It survived because people kept feeding it, generation after generation, for nearly 2 centuries. That is not a recipe. That is a promise kept across time. The Dutch oven cost $1.50, and most families kept it when they abandoned everything else. Somewhere right now, a man is lifting a lid off one at a campsite in Oregon, sourdough inside, same recipe, same fire. He does not know he is finishing a meal that was started 178 years ago by a woman whose name he will never know. And if you want more forgotten wisdom from the generations who came before us, the next video is waiting for you right now.